Good afternoon. Welcome to the 22nd Annual Central and Southwest Asian Studies Conference. It's a great privilege and honor to have all of you with us, and especially those of you from the community, but also faculty, staff, and students from University of Montana. We don't want to spend too much time in the niceties and so on and so forth, but I think a few people need to be recognized here. First and foremost, Dr. Adi Kia, co-director of the Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center. Adi, please stand up and be recognized for your outstanding work. And some of you saw the panel right before us. It was just a wonderful panel. It shows the caliber, the depth, and the quality of the students we have. And we're really proud of each and every one of them. We decided for the second panel to delve into U.S. foreign policy, both in Europe and the Middle East. And in order to do that, we have a foremost expert of U.S. foreign policy, Professor Michael Mayer, who taught here for several decades, many years, at least 1 year before I arrived, I think, Mike, right? And recently retired, but still with us. And I'm very proud and privileged to have him as a co-participant, co-presenter in our radio show. We have two radio shows on KGVO 1290. One, it was actually this morning, you missed it. It was a good one. It was on hotspots, as it's called, global hotspots. And the other one is a book club. So we have a book every month, and we choose it and we discuss it. All this to say that it's the fastest 90 minutes that I have ever spent, spending time with Mike and answering questions and commenting. But today we thought we sort of have a division of labor. So Mike will concentrate on Europe and the world confronting the Trump administration in this very complex situation, especially you have the situation, of course, with Russian aggression against Ukraine. You also have a very tumultuous economic and social situation in various Central and West European countries, from United Kingdom to France, which just had a bit of a shock yesterday. A French court basically is preventing Marine Le Pen on the right to actually run for presidency for the next, 5 years now? Yeah, and of course, the challenges, the economic challenges of most European countries, including France itself, Italy, Spain, and the rest. I will follow Mike, and I will thank you very much for helping us with that. I will follow Mike, and I will focus on the conflict in the Middle East. And it is actually, the focus is Israel, Iran, and the Arab world. We might be dealing with a real war coming up very soon between Iran and Israel, Iran and United States. And I will address some of the underlying causes for the ongoing conflict in that region. So with no further ado, please welcome Professor Michael Mayer.
There we go. Thanks, Mehrdad. I want to start by thanking Mehrdad and Artie. This is the 22nd year they've put on a conference for the public, for the university system, and It's quite an undertaking to do such a thing. Most people do it once. I did it once back in the 80s. And when you realize how much work it is, you never do it again. That's why they're so inefficient. Most people do it once, that's it, and everybody's learning each time they do it, but Mehrdad and Artie keep at it, and they've gotten awfully good at it. When Mehrdad and I first talked about doing this, we sort of thought, well, Mehrdad would do something on the Middle East, and I'd do something with the rest. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll just sort of do a quick survey of the rest of the world. And as I started trying to put it together, I realized that, well, maybe I'll leave Asia out. And that's awfully complicated. And then well, Latin America is kind of complicated, too, so maybe I'll leave Latin America out. And settled on Europe, and which also takes us to time, because when we were talking about this, Mehrdad said, maybe we should do about 30 each. And I said, oh, yeah, we can do that. We can probably do it in 20. Well, I'll be lucky to get this in 30, but I'll give it a try. 3 years ago, in February of 2022, Russia launched a completely unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And in the last 3 years, one has heard a number of analogies to the 1930s. Analogies involve most often the expansionist objectives of a dictator and all the rest. And there's certainly an element, there's an analogy to be made there. But another part of the analogy to the 1930s that I think is worth thinking about is the weakness of Western European governments. And this was a big part of the story of the 1930s, and it's a big part of the story today. And what I'm going to try to do is give you a quick overview of that particular problem facing the Trump administration. I think what we've seen in the last few years amounts basically to a disintegration of the post-World War II liberal order. Corrosive issues have effectively battered this existing order. Stagnant economies, which Mehrdad just mentioned, immigration, energy policy. And I think that these issues account in large part for the anemic response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think there are other issues as well. Western Europe is dependent on, particularly Germany, on Russian energy. Western Europe, over decades, has chronically underspent on defense. And quite legitimately, leaders in Europe and America have worried about igniting a larger war. As a consequence, what we've seen is that the West has sent limited, if increasing weaponry to Ukraine, but that much of that weaponry has been sent late as they've escalated the lethality and the range of the weapons sent to Ukraine. It's been later then it might have done some real good. And each major European nation faces a unique set of circumstances, obviously, but there are also certain striking similarities. And we may as well begin with France. As Mehrdad said, that we got some interesting news yesterday from there. But I want to go back a few years. Relations between the United States and France have been strained on several occasions over a number of different issues. President Emmanuel Macron was irate about a deal a submarine deal the United States struck with Australia, sort of freezing out France early in the Biden administration. And he also was irate over the Inflation Reduction Act, which effectively violated international agreements about subsidies. Macron also made and then clarified, you can put clarified in quotation marks, his several comments about France, the United States, and China. He told reporters on a plane on the way back from China that he would not blindly follow the United States on Taiwan. And he also repeatedly expressed his desire for strategic autonomy from the United States. He faced a fair bit of criticism from officials not only in the United States but in Western Europe, and he backed off, said he supported the autonomy of Taiwan, and then in a phone call with Biden, recommitted to maintaining peace and freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. But the French government's summary of that phone call also reveals that Macron pressed for a Chinese role in settling the controversy or the war in Ukraine. There's some interesting things about that. The one that strikes me most directly is that Macron might well have considered that the last time France enjoyed strategic autonomy from the United States, it was occupied by Germany. France eventually decided to shift to more and more support for Ukraine, but there was a real jolt in France in 2024 when the elections for the European Parliament were held. Right-wing parties made major gains in parliamentary elections across Europe, but in France it was striking. The National Rally Party, the party of Marine Le Pen, whom Mehrdad mentioned earlier, is no longer quite the fascist party of her father, but it's still a fairly right-wing party. It certainly rejects multiculturalism. It favors protectionism and government intervention in the economy. It is not a free market party. But National Rally won 30% of the vote in the European Parliament. That's twice the percentage of Macron's Renew party. Immigration was one of the key issues that generated support for National Rally. Macron responded by dissolving the parliament and calling for elections. Now, France has a president and a prime minister. Macron is president. His term does not expire until 2027, but the prime minister is usually the leader of the majority party. If there's no majority party, it's usually the leader of the largest party in the coalition. But that isn't exactly how things have worked out. In the first round of parliamentary elections for the National Assembly, the lower house, the majority is 289. But you need to understand how the French election system works. To win a seat in the first round of elections, a candidate must win a majority of the votes cast, a majority, but also 25% of eligible voters must vote. If either number falls below that target, if there are fewer than half of the votes cast, or if less than 25% of voters turn out to vote, then it moves to a second round. And in the second round, every candidate that got 12.5% of the vote is moved into the second round. If you can figure that out and remember that, you're better than I am. But anyway, in the election, in the first round, National Rally, and again, as Mehrdad pointed out, that Marine Le Pen is the most prominent leader of the party. She's the best known. Her father was really the founder of the party, but she's not technically the leader. That's Jordan Bardella. And they got 33% of the vote, which yielded 39 seats. The New Popular Front, which is a left-wing coalition, whose leader is Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which is, it is a strange coalition, really. It's a coalition of communists, eco-cranks, bigots. The Greens are the most moderate party within that coalition. France Unbowed, the far-left anti-Semitic party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is every bit as frightening in some ways, and more so, than Le Pen on the right. In fact, Mélenchon, I think you can safely say, is anti-Semitic even by French standards, which is going a ways. But France Unbowed got 28% of the vote, and that translated into 32 seats. And Macron's Ensemble Alliance got 21% and only 2 seats. In the second round, the center and the left reached an agreement. Both sides said that they would, if their candidate finished third, they would pull their candidate. So that should unite those two votes against Le Pen's party, National Rally. And it was an effective strategy. And in the end, National Rally got 142 seats. The Popular Front, the New Popular Front Party, got 180 seats on the left, and Ensemble 168. The prime minister, who came from Macron's party, resigned. Macron refused to accept his resignation. And there wasn't much that seemed possible to do for about a year before Macron could call another election. And there were real issues. Macron's spending program would have raised the debt to 110% of GDP. although the new Popular Front's party would have raised it to 130%. And it took almost 3 months to form a government. Macron finally formed a government that was clearly a shift to the right. The prime minister was Michel Barnier, a conservative. But National Rally had no seats in the cabinet, and yet they were the second largest party in the parliament. And the new government faced really difficult economic issues. The deficit in the public sector was projected to reach 5.6% of GDP in 2024 and over 6% in 2025. The European Union limits that to 3% and issued a formal warning to France that it faced discipline for violating that target. The Barnier government lasted until December of 2024, just a few months. Then Macron eventually appointed François Bayrou, a leader of the Democratic Movement, a small party, as prime minister. But the economic problems haven't gone away, and you have a coalition led by a prime minister who comes from a very small party. And then, as Mehrdad mentioned earlier, yesterday, Marine Le Pen was found guilty of embezzlement. She was accused of using money from the European Parliament to pay off staffers who were effectively members of her party, in other words, for political purposes. She was barred from running for office for 5 years, which took her out of the running for the presidency in 2027, and yet she's polling better than any other candidate at this point. She's the front runner early on for 2027. Bardella called for what he called popular and peaceful mobilization. And even former members of Macron's government have said that they were surprised at barring Le Pen from running for office. And the current justice minister, before the verdict came down, had said in November that it would have been profoundly shocking to bar her from political activity. So, in other words, France has a very shaky government and difficulties with the economy, with immigration, number of other issues. In Germany, once again, you have a president, Franz-Walter Steinmeier, who's largely ceremonial. The government is the chancellor, or we would call it the prime minister, and his ministers. And going into the last election, the government was a coalition led by Olaf Scholz of the Social Democrats. Germany's traditionally had two major parties. The Christian Democrats are the center-right, and the Social Democrats are the center-left. But Scholz's government was catastrophically unpopular. He followed through on plans to shut down the last 3 nuclear plants under pressure from the Greens, which were part of his coalition. And to meet the energy needs and at the same time the goal of decarbonization, Germany would have needed, by its own estimation, to construct 4 to 5 wind turbines every single day. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen. The reliance on renewables alone ironically made Germany dependent on Russian gas and oil, which is dirty gas and oil. And when I say that, I don't mean that Putin's government is a nasty government. It's high sulfur content, and therefore it burns dirty, as opposed to harder coal that burns more cleanly. The German economy has been shrinking for 2 years. German industrial output has fallen 20% since 2017. Angela Merkel opened the door to immigration, and subsequently there were a number of high-profile murders and sexual assaults committed by immigrants that raised a lot of public furor. And then came the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Scholz and Germany were initially very reluctant to aid Ukraine. If anything, they tilted a bit toward Putin, who was a source of important energy. But massive demonstrations by the German people in the streets pushed the Scholz government to aid Ukraine, and eventually it became the second largest donor to Ukraine after the United States. But if you look at contributions relative to GDP, Germany lags behind 12 other European nations. In October of 2023, the center-right won 2 state elections, Bavaria and Hesse. Schulz's government was very unpopular. The main issue in those elections was immigration. And then in the elections for the European Parliament, AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the right-wing party, won 16.5% of the vote, up from 11% in 2019. When you compare that, the combined votes for all three members of Schulz's governing coalition was 30%. In fact, Schulz's own party, the Social Democrats, ran behind AfD. Schulz could have delayed the election to as late as October of 2025, but his party was polling about half of what the Christian Democrats, the center-right party, was polling. And so in November of 2024, that option vanished when Germany's government collapsed. Schulz fired his finance minister, a man named Christian Lindner, who was the leader of a pro-business party, the Free Democrats. The fight was over the budget for 2025. Germany, as I said, was in its second year of without any economic growth. Last year, the economy actually contracted. And Lindner refused Schulz's demand to loosen the spending limit that requires the German governments to balance a budget. Lindner, after he was fired, withdrew his party's support from the government, which left Schulz's Christian Democrats and the Greens as a coalition, a minority coalition, and yet the government. And so the Christian Democrats, led by Friedrich Merz, were running ahead in the polls. The Russian invasion of Ukraine had increased energy prices, led Germany to increase defense spending. They did take in 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees, which cost money. And when the election came in February 2025, the results were catastrophic for the Social Democrats. In Germany, this is another thing that people don't realize, how different political systems are. Every voter gets 2 votes. One is for a candidate in a constituency. The second is for a party. And the Bundestag has 630 seats. To qualify to take a seat, a party must win a minimum of 5% of the vote or 3 constituencies. That's provided for in the Basic Law, which goes back to the creation of West Germany back in the 1940s. When the election results were in, the CDU had 28.6% of the vote, translated 208 seats, but a very disappointing showing. AfD had 24.1% of the votes, 152 seats. And the Social Democrats, their lowest level ever, 16.4% and 120 seats. That made it very, very difficult to form a majority coalition, especially since the center-right swore that they would not form a government with AfD, which would have been the one logical place to go for votes. But again, AfD has a pretty bad odor with the other parties. Merz is now in talks with the Social Democrats, hoping to form a coalition. So once again, in Germany, you see a very unstable and difficult political system. And things are different but similar in some ways in Great Britain. Britain had an election in June of 2024. The Tories had been the ruling party. They were deeply unpopular. It's a curious phenomenon, too, because whether you count from the date of the referendum on Brexit or the date that Brexit took effect, GDP in Great Britain is higher than in the European Union. Consumer purchasing power in Great Britain during that period, higher than the European Union. And median monthly earnings were up about 14%. But the United Kingdom still struggled with inflation, high unemployment. Sunak had also promised to reduce immigration to the UK and found it difficult to do so. The elections were a stunning defeat for the Tories. Labour, led by Keir Starmer, won 411 seats. It looked like, and it was often reported, especially in this country, as a massive victory for Labour. And in one sense it was. They won 63% of the seats in the Bundestag. But they only won 33.7% of the vote. The Conservatives won 121 seats, which is 18% of the seats, and won about 23.7% of the vote. The Liberal Democrats won 72 seats, 11% of the seats, about 12% of the vote, and Reform, Nigel Farage, won 5 seats and 14% of the vote. So Labor's majority was large, but shallow. In other words, they won a lot of seats, but they only got a little over a third of the vote. In fact, they got about the same number of votes they got when they were wiped out by the Tories in 2019. And Keir Starmer has proved to be something of an inept leader. In December 2023, polls showed that only 28% of Labor voters thought the government was doing a good job. That's Labor voters, not the public. The financial crisis of 2008 and COVID battered the government's finances. Real wages in Britain have been stagnant since 2008. The tax burden is the heaviest in 7 decades. The debt to GDP ratio, roughly 100%, is the highest it's been in 60 years. What's more, their policy, which they call a race to net zero greenhouse emissions, proved to be economically damaging, and it's been accelerated by Ed Miliband, essentially the Secretary of Energy. He's moved up the goal of reaching net zero from 2035, which wasn't realistic, to 2030, which is even less realistic. What's more, Labor promised during the campaign that their spending schemes were, quote, fully costed and would not require increases in taxes. After the election, they announced that they found a $22 billion black hole in the budget. And Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, announced that the budget would include the largest tax increases since 1970, about 40 billion pounds. What's more, the taxes hit employment and income. Labor pledged that they wouldn't increase taxes on income, but there's an increase in the capital gains tax proposed. There's a higher contribution for the National Health Service. These are basically taxes on ordinary people. And immigration was also a very important issue that has gotten only hotter. In July of this past year, a man attacked a party and killed 3 little girls and wounded 10, 8 of them children. In early August, there was a riot. A group of British nationals attacked asylum seekers in a hotel. Starmer called the riot far-right thuggery, which I guess is about right. But he also called for maximum sentences for disinformation that the attacker was a Muslim or an immigrant. Police identified the attacker as, quote, Welsh. Well, he was living in Wales, but they then admitted that it was a man named Axel Rudakubana, who was the son of Rwandan immigrants, and then they announced that he was arrested with al-Qaeda manual and with making ricin. If Starmer and his government were genuinely uninformed of that fact, that was a scandal. If they were informed, it was a different kind of scandal. There's also the so-called grooming scandal, which is about the abuse, rape, and kidnapping of literally thousands of girls and women, predominantly by Pakistani as well as Bangladeshi and Afghan Muslim men. This took place between the mid-1990s and the mid-2010s. The victims were almost all underage white girls from what the British social services call disturbed backgrounds, in other words, from broken families of one sort or another. Reports by the government revealed that the girls were beaten, branded, bottles were shoved into them, they were doused with gasoline, and officials seemed to be willing to look the other way in the interest of what they called community relations. Authorities not only failed to act, but they actively suppressed the truth. I think they did this partly because they were worried about creating a backlash against a non-white minority, and they were very afraid of the backlash from the white majority. Some of this occurred during the time when Keir Starmer, now Prime Minister, was Director of Public Prosecutions. He eventually had to apologize for this, but in January, he accused those calling for an inquiry into this of, quote, amplifying what the far right is saying. So Starmer's government has been beset with scandals and factions. Ministers have been caught accepting freebies from donors including concert tickets, flights, vacations, and Starmer's wardrobe. Italy is an interesting phenomenon. Giorgio Meloni, who's the leader of the Brothers of Italy party, which is Mussolini's old party, is now the prime minister in coalition, and she governs in coalition with Matteo Salvini and Silvio Berlusconi's center-right Forza Italiano. The fascist roots of Meloni's party are very real, but they're institutional. They're not ideological. Meloni has disavowed many times anti-democratic regimes, has disavowed fascism, and said that there's no place in her party for racism, fascism, or anti-Semitism. Meloni has turned out to be a successful administrator, I think much to the surprise of at least some, and it raises an interesting issue. Who would have thought that Italy, which has had 69 different governments since World War II, now has the most stable government in Western Europe? That one was a surprise. The Netherlands faces similar problems. A governing coalition of 4 parties under Mark Rutte collapsed in 2024, and the result was the emergence of Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom, a right-wing party that won 38 seats, which made them by far the largest party in the last elections. At first, the center-right parties said they would not even consider, well, at first they said they would possibly consider a coalition with Wilders. Then they said they wouldn't, and then after 3 months, they eventually entered a coalition with Wilders. Dick Schoof became prime minister in a 4-party coalition. The largest party is Wilders' Party for Freedom. Spain also has a curious situation where the Popular Party, the Conservative Party, won the largest number of votes. But the prime minister, who's been in power since 2018, was able to cobble together a coalition that made him, again, the prime minister, even though, again, he's from a minority party. So if you look at that, things don't look all that promising. And you look at NATO, you see many of these strains. Lord Ismay, the first Secretary General of NATO, said the purpose of NATO was, quote, to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. But NATO's faced a series of problems. The entry of Finland and Sweden were opposed by Hungary initially and by Turkey for a long time. That led to frictions. It's also interesting that Great Britain, Germany, and France do not agree with Trump's approach to ending the war in Ukraine. But they can't agree among themselves. In February, Macron called a meeting of Scholz from Germany and Macron from France and Starmer from England. Starmer and Macron were willing to send British and French troops as peacekeepers. Scholz refused. And again, I think this is partly the dependence on German energy. In February, J.D. Vance, the American vice president, delivered a speech to the Munich Security Conference and said that it was time for Europe to step up in a big way for its own defense. And he also said it was time for Europe to return to its democratic values. The real threat to NATO, he said, is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. The real threat is from within, the retreat of Europe from one of its some of its most fundamental values. And he admitted that the United States is also engaged in a retreat from free speech. There are questions now about whether Europe can back up its calls for an independent defense. Europe still, although they've increased defense spending enormously, is not spending at anything like the rate it would need to do to make a credible defense against the Russians. At the end of the Cold War, Great Britain spent about 7% of its GDP on defense. Today, it's 2.3%. And part of this is because of weak economies in Western Europe. Putin basically challenges Europe. Can you defend yourself? And it doesn't look all that promising for Europe. And we've seen the European Union under attack, the emergence of the right in the elections. And there have been a series of issues that have challenged both the institutions, NATO, and the European Union, but also the individual countries. These challenges include slow economies, energy policy, immigration, and the power exercised by bureaucrats in Brussels, which is increasingly unpopular in a number of countries. This has led to the rise of populist leaders on both the left and the right, maybe particularly the right. And the political class of Europe talks about these things as if they're like the weather. You know, they're beyond anyone's control, they just happen. But much of the discontent is the direct result of policies imposed by the bureaucrats. Looking only at Europe, forget Asia, forget the Middle East, forget Latin America, where there are problems of various sorts. There are convulsive changes. There's political instability. And this would create problems for any American administration, and it remains to be seen just how well Trump and his administration deal with them. Thank you very much.
All right, we now switch our focus to the area that we call Middle East or Southwest Asia. And as we speak, I just want to remind everyone that the United States has deployed stealth bombers to key base on Diego Garcia amid tension with Iran. If you don't know where Diego Garcia is, it's in the Indian Ocean. And if you think that you might want to visit it, please don't. Though it's a remote, beautiful island, as it says, paradise of lush vegetation and white sand beaches surrounded by crystal blue waters. When you read this, you think it's a tourist promotion, actually. And then you read that this is not a tourist destination. There are about 4,000 U.S. and British military personnel there. And, of course, the buildup started after the war of words accelerated between the government of Iran, the Islamic regime in Iran, and Washington, especially the Trump administration. The arrival of stealth bombers, you can actually interpret it in different fashion. Is it real, or is it a bluff, or is it a risk, or is it a warning? There are all sorts of analysis. But for us to understand how we got here, let me go briefly to a background. That's why boring historians like we are for. We can never predict the future, but we are here to bore you with facts of history. First and foremost, I've always emphasized on the fundamental fact that we live in a new Cold War. It's actually hasn't been that cold since 2023. It has very hot spots at the same time. But we have really a bipolar world in which China leads a bloc supported by Russia, Belarus, Iran, North Korea. We can go down the list. That's one bloc, basically, power bloc, which is challenging United States and its European allies, but also its Middle Eastern allies. And in this alliance, unlike the first Cold War, in which it was ideological, it was the communist bloc versus the capitalist bloc, it was Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union on the one side and United States and its allies on the other, you have actually no ideological preference. Here is Putin, a former KGB agent, shaking hands and hugging Islamic fundamentalists in Iran. What is the ideological commonality between a former communist KGB agent and a bunch of Shia radical fundamentalist mullahs? There is none. Add China to it, it becomes a bad soup. You cannot even touch it. Add North Korea and Belarus, there's just too much mushroom and carrot even to look at it. So you have this kind of situation. It's a soup that is untouchable, but it is there and we have to deal with it. On the other hand, you have basically United States, Israel, and local Arab allies, principally Saudi Arabia, but also the Persian Gulf states, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Oman, to some degree Qatar, and of course Bahrain. These are Persian Gulf states, plus a few other Arab countries, Jordan, Egypt, and so on and so forth. So this is a sort of the way I kind of look at it. It's a bit of a proxy war, right? So if you want to kind of contextualize the situation, for example, in Gaza, you have to understand a few facts that now I'm going to sort of try to at least deconstruct or analyze as much as I can. The principal proxies, the way sort of the outside world looks at it, is Israel represents United States and Iran represents the China, Soviet, North Korea, Belarus bloc, basically. And these are fighting over hegemony in the Middle East region. And in this battle, of course, there is even more that is very important. You have two governments which are very asymmetrical in terms of their power. Israel has some of the most advanced military technology in terms of its Air Force capabilities, in terms of its IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and even its Navy. It's one of the best armed forces in the world, to say the least. Iran doesn't have that. Iran has hardly any Air Force. Iran has land power, but it has some ballistic missiles and so on and so forth. So how has Iran balanced its power vis-a-vis Israel, that it calls the greatest enemy of Iran and the Islamic world? It has created asymmetrical warfare. Asymmetrical warfare means that you compensate for your lack of military technology with bringing some new elements. That new elements are your proxies. And Iran has several proxies that we have to sort of learn about. And it is our understanding that without these proxies, you would not have October 7, 2023. It was the battle between Iran and its proxies versus Israel. What happened on October 7, 2023, just to refresh our memories, the Palestinian Islamist group, Hamas, which is designated as a terrorist organization, led a surprise attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip. More than 1,200 Israelis were, and other foreign nationals were killed, and that included 35 U.S. citizens in Israel. Also, 253 Israelis were taken as hostage. And everybody in the region knew right away when Hamas attacked that it wasn't Hamas attacking. It was Iran attacking through a proxy, basically. So we have to understand this sort of proxy component. And I'm not sharing these disturbing images to remind us of a very, very tragic moment, but also in terms of what has happened since then, especially since October 7th. The Middle East changed on that day and the days that followed. That is, here is a proxy of Iran, a terrorist organization operating from Gaza Strip, which is what? 25, 30-mile sandy beach on the Mediterranean, shooting missiles at Israel, attacking Israeli citizens, and firing 200 rockets in less than 24 hours. And that kind of technology could not be produced in Gaza. That kind of technology was shipped to Gaza by Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards, and it took a great deal of money to produce them. Iran also supported Hamas by providing about $150 million in 1 year to that organization. The excuse that Iran basically brings up is because it's asymmetrical warfare and we want to prevent Israel from attacking Iran. The only way we can counterbalance the might of Israeli armed forces is through our proxies. And of course, the result was that the next day, Israel struck back and a war began, the war that still goes on, actually. Israel basically declared war on Hamas, And thousands of Palestinians, of course, have died since then. Many have become refugees. And this policy of maximum force has created a situation that nobody actually knows now what to do with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and what to do with Gaza until somebody said, well, oh, we will buy it or we will take it over. And I think there was some giggling in the background, but I don't think anybody took that seriously. But at any rate, you have a situation on the ground. So why did Hamas, a proxy of Iran, attack Israel on October 7, 2023? Why not October 20th? Why not November 5th? It happened because the Abraham Accords, which had been negotiated by United States as the middleman, was reaching a new level. What was this Abraham Accords? It was actually negotiated during the first Trump administration, and it brought Israel and several Arab countries to the negotiation table, and actually recognition by Arab countries, United Arab Emirates, then of course Sudan joined, Morocco joined. And on that week of October 7, 2023, the big one was joining the Abraham Accords. That was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had negotiated with Israel privately, secretly, and they were going to sign a permanent peace. What does permanent peace mean? Is that Saudi Arabia, as the strongest Arab country militarily and economically, would recognize the existence of the Jewish state. In return, Israel would promise a non-aggression pact, and they would normalize the relationship. That peace between the Arab world, led by its main leader, Saudi Arabia, and a Jewish state called Israel, would have isolated the Islamic regime in Iran permanently. That peace had to be interrupted. It had to be disrupted. It had to be undermined. And in order to undermine it, there had to be a war in which Israel would attack Palestinians, and as a result, it would become impossible for the Arab world to recognize the state of Israel. When you have a state of war, Palestinians are killed, how can you actually go and recognize the Jewish state called Israel? For that reason, and this was, the timing of it was quite astonishing in some ways. That week, as Saudi Arabia and Israel are about to sign a peace treaty, suddenly Hamas attacks Israel, and this whole process, which had started back in 2016, 2017, suddenly collapses. And by the way, you want to know who actually negotiated it. It was Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of President Trump. This is what the negotiations were all about. They sat and they really hashed out all the details and so on and so forth in several meetings, and the result was a peace treaty that could be lasting, actually, but it didn't last. Why did it not last, and why was it reversed? Part of it, and why does Iran actually find itself in a position to undermine the peace treaty and the peace accords or the possibility of peace, is because there was a major change, sudden shift from Abraham Accords to a new policy. The new policy after the first Trump administration left the White House, the principal policy of the Biden administration was to renegotiate with Iran again and to actually bring Iran back into the table by recognizing its strategic anxieties and by the rise of Iranian power. Let us negotiate that we recognize you as a major power, but in return you would not create a mess out of the Middle East. Those in the Biden administration who were proposing or advocating this policy actually suggested that the United States should allow Iran again to sell oil and gas to various buyers. So they actually reversed the policy of the Obama administration, they reversed the Trump administration policy, and they allowed Iran to sell oil and gas. Who would Iran sell oil and gas to? The principal buyer was China. And in the process of selling oil and gas, Iran made about $95 billion. This is the way sort of the negotiations work. But you know, the regime in Tehran, some folks in Washington thinks we are just good people. Look at the mirror, all of us, everyone is beautiful. You know, we learned in the 70s and so on and so on. So Iranians, we allow them to sell oil and gas, they would love us. Well, they took that as a sign of weakness. They took $95 billion, thank you very much. Now we have enormous amount of money to rearm all our proxies. So they went back to Hamas. They actually upgraded the quality of military technology they were providing Hamas. Of course, with this, Iran was really flush with cash to even help more proxies. And of course, it didn't stop there. We actually paid Iran about $7 billion to release a few American citizens who were held in Iran as hostages. These were mostly American Iranians who had actually gone to Iran to do business secretly, but they had been caught. Iran is involved in this trade. They keep folks with U.S. citizenship until United States pays a large handsome money, and they will release them. Whatever the case may be, was that money, the $95 billion, allowed Iran to create a ring of fire around Israel. And this understanding this ring of fire, which is asymmetrical warfare through proxies against Israel, is a key strategic goal of the Iranian regime. So who are these proxies? Let's go over them one by one. Of course, Hamas, we have mentioned them, and the Gaza Strip. Hezbollah, the Party of God in Lebanon. It's a Shia organization in Lebanon. And the Houthis, who are located in Yemen, south of Saudi Arabia in the Arabian Peninsula. They're all armed and trained by the Iranian regime. So Iran basically invited, this is Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, to Tehran. Kiss, hug, how much money do you need? How much arms do you need? So on and so forth. How much do you need to dig all those tunnels under Gaza? Because, you know, Gaza was just packed with these tunnels, hundreds of miles of tunnels. And, of course, Hamas gave the bill, and the Iranians paid the bill, the Iranian regime, I should say. This is the Gaza Strip. When a Hamas leader was asked, it is on YouTube if you want to actually check it out, what have you done with all the money you have received from your foreign donors? How many schools, how many clinics, how many hospitals, how many charitable foundations, and so on and so forth. The Hamas representative looked at the report and said, what are you talking about? That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to fight Israel. What you're talking about, hospitals, schools, healthcare, that's the responsibility of Israel and United Nations. That's the mentality in Gaza that you are dealing with. So negotiating peace with this kind of organization will be very difficult. Hezbollah is another story. This is a so-called Shia pro-Iran group, the Party of God in Lebanon. They are armed to their teeth just north of Israel in southern Lebanon, and they have about 60,000 to 100,000, we don't know the exact number, of long-range missiles that they could actually hit Israel at will at any time they decided to. So here is Hamas, just to the west of Israel on Gaza Strip. Here is Hezbollah, just to the north of Israel in Lebanon. And here is, Hezbollah. They are all trained by the Iranian Special Forces. They actually dress just like the Iranian Special Forces. You see Hezbollah fighters. These are the Iranian Revolutionary Guards fighters who train them. So it's actually an extension of Iranian security and military intelligence, and they work on behalf of Iran to keep Israel on its feet to the north. one cartoon can tell the entire presentation that I have for you. This is basically what the game is. You have two proxies. Now, Iran has added more recently a third proxy to the south, and that is, of course, Yemen's Houthi rebels who have been added. They have been given a great deal of arms and so on and so forth. Now, with long-range missiles from Yemen, you can hit Israel, but the job of the Houthis is something else, to disrupt trade on the Red Sea and to really disrupt and create major havoc for shipping in the Red Sea. And Red Sea is very important because it connects, of course, the Suez Canal all the way to the Indian Ocean. So this is Iran flexing muscle through its proxies, and in the process, disrupting the peace process between the Arab world and Israel. So Iran also does something which had not happened in the history of the Middle East before. It arms itself with maximum missile capability, and it actually attacks Israel. Several hundred missiles were fired against Israel. Of course, the dome that the United States has provided, the defensive dome that the United States has provided, actually created a situation that at least Israel could destroy 99% of the incoming missiles, but most of them reached the border of Israel, but they were shot down. So Iran attacks, and this is a picture over Tel Aviv, actually over Israel as the missiles are landing. But you know what is fascinating? And the West is also wondering what is really happening. The overwhelming majority of the Iranian people oppose this foreign policy and, in fact, have expressed their opposition repeatedly against this foreign policy of adventurism and proxy warfare. This is on a street in Tehran. Israeli flag, by the way. This is amazing stuff when you hear about it. And, of course, signs and symbols and every slogan that you can find. If you have been watching the celebrations of the Persian New Year on March 20th, 21st, you realize that a large majority of the Iranian people do not only want this regime to go and its foreign policy to be reversed, but they want actually to see a much better relationship, not only with Israel, but with the neighboring Arab countries, a sort of a peaceful coexistence. Whatever the case may be, this is the old Iranian flag and Israeli flag held by an Iranian demonstrator. Whatever the case may be, Israel responded once it actually neutralized Hamas on Gaza Strip. What did they do? They first went after the head of Hamas. This is, again, Ismail Haniyeh, who got a hug and a kiss from Mr. Khamenei, the leader, the supreme leader of Iran. He was visiting Iran at the time. It was July 31st, 2024. He had come probably to get another, there is also something that you can watch on YouTube. One of the leaders of Hamas says that as they were leaving Iran, they were told, no, you shouldn't marry. There is a gift coming. And they see suitcase after suitcase after suitcase come to the customs as they are leaving Iran. They open the suitcase, cash. Another suitcase, cash. 21 suitcases packed with cash. At the time, $23 million. And when the other briefcases and suitcases arrived, the pilot said it was getting too heavy to take off. So you have to come back for the additional suitcases of cash that the Iranian regime has given. That's why he visits Iran, to order his weaponries and the money that he needs, basically. But he was visiting Iran, and this is Ismail Haniyeh, and he had just met the newly, we don't use the verb elected, hand-selected president of Iran, because the president is basically chosen by the supreme leader. And he had just shaken hands with Mr. Pezeshkian, the newly appointed president of Iran, and he was tired, so he went to his guest house in Tehran next to the mountains, beautiful, so on and so forth. He put his head on the pillow, and the pillow blew up. And it killed him and his bodyguard. Now, ask yourself, how did Israel get into a bedroom in northern Tehran? What kind of capability does Israel have? What kind of capability Israel has is thanks to a lot of Iranians who are collaborating with Israel within the Iranian military and intelligence network. A lot of folks inside the Iranian government are dissatisfied enough that they had actually pinpointed the bedroom and the pillow and the kind of bedding that was used. And at the last moment, we know now that the bedding and the pillows had been changed just to make sure that it would respond to a person, putting his head on it. And of course, that person was Ismail Hania. So that's the first target. The second target was the head of the other proxy, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, who was killed by an Israeli strike on September 27, 2024. That was a major attack on the headquarters of Hezbollah in Beirut, Lebanon. And of course, he and a large number of his followers and advisors and lieutenants was killed by Israel. And of course, something else and something big happened. Iran has been relying on Syria to transfer its arms to Hezbollah via Syria. Syria and the Assad family were the closest Arab allies of Iran in the region. This, don't be taken a lot with the nice clothing and the appearance. This is, that's Godfather, Marlon Brando, and the rest are basically, you remember the Godfather. Anyway, this is a crime family which has been responsible for murdering hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrian civilians. The first thing the opponents of the regime discovered was a mass grave of nearly 120,000 people buried in Syria after they took Damascus. The middle guy, the shorter guy, Basel, was to be the successor to their father, Hafez al-Assad, who seized power through a military coup. He was an Air Force officer in Syria. He came to power in 1970, Hafez. Then this is one of those republics which are dynastic, like North Korea. 3 generations, we have a republic, but in fact, it's a monarchy. So Hafez al-Assad had a heart ailment, and he had designated his oldest son in the middle as a successor, but the oldest son loved driving fast cars, and he killed himself in a car accident. So they looked for sort of who should substitute the daddy, and they brought the tallest guy, Bashar, poor guy. He was studying to become an ophthalmologist in London, of all places. And he was actually having an enjoyable time in London. They called him back and they told him, starting tomorrow, you will be the field marshal of the Syrian armed forces. The eye doctor became a general overnight. That's what happens. Miracles can happen when you live under those kinds of dictatorships. Anyway, so Bashar took over in 2000 with the brothers and the sister helping him consolidate the regime. And they butchered the people of Syria to stay in power. But that was the closest ally Iran had in the region. And it was thanks to this buddy-buddy relationship, hug and kiss. You receive cheap oil, cheap gas. You receive all the money that you want, but you have to allow Iran to establish bases inside Syria and transfer money and arms to its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, especially in Lebanon, that you had this very interesting alliance. So it wasn't just the proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis. It was also Syrian regime. And now the Syrian regime is gone. So you have this kind of a, for lack of better word, basically what has happened is a cleanup of the leadership of the proxy organizations which were helping Iran. And suddenly the realization in Israel that this is not sufficient. We have to go one step further. And that one step further is, of course, to change the regime itself inside Iran. Because as long as it arms and it finances its proxies, and as long as it has a nuclear capability, which can be weaponized within a week or two, you will have a threat, which will be there permanently if you do not deal with it. People always say, well, Pakistan has nuclear bombs. Israel itself has it. What if Iran got it? So what? You know, it's another country. So what is that the moment Iran develops that kind of weaponry, that kind of capability, first of all, it will use it, as it has shown that it will be able to and willing to do this. But the moment, that day when Iran is armed with nuclear warheads, you bet it, that Turkey will have it. Saudi Arabia will have it. You will have an arms race that you have never seen in the world before. You will have a tinderbox in the Middle East, a tinderbox of the world exploding, basically, as a result of one power have it. And that is why, as we speak and as we wrap up, this administration has now decided to force Iran to disarm, more or less. That is, get rid of its nuclear capability, in fact, get rid of its ballistic missile, and somehow come to negotiation table. So far, Iran has refused to negotiate. The message from Tehran is that we will not negotiate under duress. The question to Moscow and Beijing especially is, how far are you going to come behind us if United States attacks? And I think the answer is very clear. Russia is too busy in Ukraine to come to Iran's help. Russia did not come to Assad's help in Syria. They came, they got rid of him, and Russia just basically flew him to Moscow. That's all Russia will do. I don't think they like to have too many Shia Muslim mullahs in Moscow either. So I don't think they will even do that kind of favor for the Islamic regime. So Russia is not going to come. China, its policy is very different. China's policy is non-militaristic, more based on markets and soft diplomacy and soft commercial and economic enterprises. It's not in the periphery of China anyway. And China now has a very thriving relationship with the Arab world, especially multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Saudis. And it does not want to jeopardize its status, its position vis-a-vis Iran, and especially if it is in a conflict with the United States. So I think we are on a crossroad, and the crossroad is where will United States go if Iran does not negotiate? Is the war an option? Yes, it is an option. It is on the table. Is it going to be a land war? Impossible. United States does not have that kind of force on the ground. It will be an air war probably, and it will target Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran has a population of 90 million people, and it's a very rugged, mountainous, and tough country to operate in. Its capital city of 14 million, Tehran, is that by itself is a challenge that no country will take up. So let's see, and this is my question to those who actually support the Trump administration or who have actually suggested that bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, that's one thing the United States can do. But the next question is, what if the regime does not fall? What if the regime actually gains popularity or it backfires in terms of United States trying to get rid of it? And what will United States and Israel do? That's the $60 million question that I don't have an answer to. I hope you do. Thank you very much. We take a few questions, and there is a microphone right there, so please feel free to come and ask your question by using the microphone. Yes, please, familiar face.
Thank you so much, Professor Kia. It was great to hear from you, and same to you, Professor Meir. I have my question written down here, so I'm just going to read it directly. In 2018, the now current U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, called for the third temple to be built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. In 2022,
I'm sorry, what did he ask for? The call?
the third temple to be built, built over the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
In 2022, 5 red heifers were imported from Texas to Israel and have been under armed guard since. And in August of last year, the ultra-nationalist and Jewish Power Party leader, Ben Gvir, went to the Grand Mosque in Jerusalem and prayed. So the one thing, and I know like you didn't mention this in your analysis, and we've talked about this shortly before, is, you know, from Christians who want the second coming to Sunni Muslims who want the Mahdi, to Shia Iranians who want the 12th Imam, and then Jewish Messianics who want the third temple and their Messiah to come. This is a dynamic that I haven't really seen reported much in Western press as underpinning much of the conflict in the Middle East. And I was really wanting to hear your inputs on how important this is and whether or not you think this could potentially be the final straw that could snap the entire region's back and really create like the nastiest holy war in the entire region's history.
Great question. Mike, you want to? I know that when we talk about Jerusalem, Israel, Palestine, the first, sort of expectation is for us to talk about religion. And I always disappoint my audience. First, because I always criticize both Republicans and Democrats. They hate that kind of person. They want a partisan guy who just reinforces my beliefs. And they don't want this guy to come and, say negative things about both sides. Anyway, so I apologize for that. And then the other thing is always religion. But as you know very well, I don't think this conflict in its origins and roots has anything to do with religion. Not to say, I just mentioned Hamas as a militant Islamist group. I'm not going to deny that. But the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has always been about one thing, and that is land. It hasn't been about religion. But why do I hesitate to go to religion? Is because the notion behind this question is that all Palestinians are Muslims, and they're not. Arab Palestinians are majority Muslims, followers of Islam, but there is a significant Christian population, Christian Arab population. And they have their churches and so on and so. They go to church every Sunday and more. And in fact, the Christmas celebrations, the New Year celebrations in Jerusalem are significant, not because of pilgrims or tourists. It was also because the Arab population is partially Christian. So Palestinians are not just Muslims, they're Christian. And then the Jewish population, that is the Israeli population, only a certain segment of the Israeli population is practicing Jews. Israel has a significant secular population. In fact, Israel was created by secular Jews. We were talking about it today. Theodor Herzl or Chaim Weizmann, these were highly intellectual, scientific, European thinkers, and coming from sort of more socialist, actually left-wing sort of orientation. So the conflict has never been about religion. The conflict is basically the Jewish people consider this as their ancient homeland. The Palestinian people consider this as their homeland. Both sides consider Jerusalem as their capital, and that's why Jerusalem is so important. Now, have religious parties with religious ideologies in more recent decades manipulated this, Hamas on the side of Palestinians, or maybe ultra-Orthodox or ultra-religious parties in Israel. Of course, religion has been manipulated. But as far as I'm concerned, it is not a religious war. And that's why I think it's very important to understand. The other thing I would suggest is that it's easy to reduce everything to religion and war of religions and so on. So it's much harder to understand other aspects. The conflict over water. Water is gold in that part of the world. The conflict over water, how much of the water of the Jordan River Israel controls, how much of it is Jordan can control, how much of it Palestinians can control, and so on and so forth. It's big. The status of Jerusalem is another issue, and so on, the status of Jewish settlements in the West Bank. All these issues make you realize how multifaceted and complicated this conflict is. So I would not reduce it to religion, and in fact say that religion should not be used as a metric for understanding the depth and the complications of the problem. Yeah. Questions, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to add something?
A little less controversially this time, actually. I wanted to address something you'd said earlier about France scaling back their nuclear power and changing their timetables on all those regulations. Is this kind of similar to how we see in California, where this is more of a political statement to get voters to support their causes by saying, we're going to do this fast, instead of more reasonable time period?
It's a good question. Again, the most dramatic example of this is Germany, which actually did have rely pretty heavily on nuclear power for domestic energy, and then literally dismantled its nuclear energy infrastructure in an effort to move to renewables, and they did so very quickly. Now, the timetable that I mentioned is England, which when Labour took power recently, and Ed Miliband became the essentially Secretary of Energy, what we would call Secretary of Energy. He moved up an unrealistic timetable, which they're not going to make. I mean, and they're not crazy enough to do it. Germany has unbelievably high energy costs. This is why their industrial base has been leaving Germany. As I said, they've lost something like 20% of their industrial base with high energy prices and other things. England is probably, if I had to guess, and it would be just that, they're not going to do that. Although England, again, has very high energy prices, which seems to many on the ground to be unnecessary because they have North Sea oil. But it's again, it's a policy decision that I just don't think there's going to be support even within Labour. Labour has moved away from its base as a working class party, but it still has a significant union influence, and I just don't think that's likely to go through even with the enormous majority that Labour has. They can lose a lot of followers and on a vote and still carry a majority.
Any other questions? Please.
Dr. Kia, who in the region is actually concerned about the plight of the Palestinians?
Who in the region is concerned about the flight of the Palestinians?
I mean, if the groups you mentioned are all just attacking Israel on behalf of Iran.
Yeah. The tragedy of the Palestinian people is that from the very inception, and it's very unfortunate, the Arab countries surrounding them have never viewed them as anything but a very convenient toy that can be manipulated. I mean, there are folks in this place right now who have had my classes, and they know that in 1948, for example, during the first Arab-Israeli war, a part of British Palestine, the British ruled here, since early 1920s all the way to May 15th, 1948. A segment of British Palestine, as a result of the war, fell into the hands of the Jordanian government. In fact, what we call the West Bank of the Jordan River, with Jerusalem, old Jerusalem, as its capital. It was under Jordanian rule until June 1967. Did the Jordanian government ever think about handing that to the Palestinians? No, the answer. Gaza Strip, what Hamas now has, was under Egyptian rule from January 1949 to June 1967. Did the Egyptian government, even under a nationalist like Gamal Abdel Nasser, who called for Arab unity, ever conceive of the possibility of negotiating with Jordan? Let's give West Bank and Gaza to the Palestinians and have them have a country. Never. Right after June 1967, which proved to be a disaster for Arab countries, immediately the Arab countries called for Israel to create a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. It's very interesting. You become very generous after you lose the territory. So doesn't it tell you that the tragedy is that? And of course, the tragedy is added by the fact that Hamas, of all organizations, was fed and funded far more than, there are actually Palestinian association groups, professors, writers, intellectuals. They have never received a penny because they stood for some kind of negotiated settlement. But Hamas received millions of dollars, and not only from non-Arab Iran, but from Qatar, $158 million Qatar poured into Hamas's treasury. Why? Why can't you ever help the Palestinians? Did Qatar, did Kuwait, did Saudi Arabia? These are oil-producing, very rich Arab countries. Did they ever create an infrastructure for Palestinians in the West Bank or Gaza? Never. So when it comes to international conferences, United Nations, they will rip you into pieces if you say anything negative. Our Palestinian brothers and sisters are in need of, recognition. And then, in reality, oh my God, you should see their performance when it comes to the Palestinians. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating, it's embarrassing. And the tragedy is, of course, the Palestinians, mimicking the Zionist movement, by the way, is one of the most educated portion of the Arab population in the world. Look at the majority of professors in this country who call themselves Arabs. The majority are Palestinians. Radical, moderate, whatever they are, they're Palestinians. It shows the level of education. Why is that an issue? Is because educated people can be a threat. If they ever get a country, they might maybe in that remote future, they might actually create a democratic secular system which might undermine Saudi Arabia as an alternative. Do you see? These kinds of things are also there in there. So let's keep them poor, jobless, unemployed, under occupation, and at the same time miserable. And this way we can manipulate them. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality.
Yeah, I just add one thing to support what Mehrdad just said, which is that although Gaza was used in the 1950s as a launching base for attacks into Israel, and occasionally Israel struck back into Gaza, in the '67 war, Israel's plan was to bypass Gaza. They didn't want it. There was no use for it. They didn't take Gaza until they started taking fire from Gaza, and then they went in and captured it. At the end of the war, they offered it back. The Egyptians didn't want it. And at the end of the 1973 war, they once again offered it to Egypt. Again, Egypt said, no, thank you. You can deal with that mess. And so going back to Mehrdad's point, and the interest in actually creating a viable Palestinian entity of some sort in some places it just hasn't been there.
And two other, and we will wrap up. One is that the country that does not want at all to have anything to do with an independent Palestinian state is Jordan. Jordan is already 65% Palestinian. So can you imagine if you have a Palestinian state in the West Bank? What would the Palestinian want? Just in a natural process. Palestinians in the West Bank would like to join the Palestinians in Jordan to create a larger Palestinian state. That's bye-bye King Abdullah, right, of Jordan. These are the considerations that the Arab government is very insecure, very unpopular, overly very corrupt and inept will bring. And to reinforce what Mike just said, in the Camp David peace accords, now we have the documents that President Carter is sitting on one side, Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel and President Anwar Sadat are sitting on the two sides. And Prime Minister Begin of Israel says, Gaza is yours. Let's just, Gaza is part of Israel. We were giving a... And President Sadat looks at him and he says, no, it's yours. That tells you something. It's a hot potato. Why don't you try to eat it now? Which means who wants 2 million Palestinians, in a 25-mile zone with no economy, no foundation, to actually be part of Israel or part of Egyptian economy? Just adds to the misery of the average Egyptian citizen. So you look at Jordan's and his policy, you can look at Egypt, still to this day, they don't want to have anything to do with Palestinians. But when it comes to Gaza, they're all crying now out of sadness for the suffering of fellow Arab brothers in Palestine. Thank you very much for your patience.